Good evening and welcome to a very special interview show of The Prode. The tensions between Russian Federation and the West are at an all-time high, and there is no hope of a ceasefire as of now in the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. Joining me today from Kyiv to talk about the on-ground situation in Ukraine is the Parliamentary Program Officer of Ukraine's National Democratic Institute, Ms. Lilia Slobodian. Thank you so much, Lilia, for your time and a very warm welcome to the show. Really appreciate that you have taken our time to do this.
Thank you for welcoming me.
So I would like to begin the discussion by asking that how do you see the Russian claims of capturing the Mariupol city of Ukraine, and what is your overall assessment of the recent developments in the war, and what actually is the on-ground situation in Ukraine to start with?
Thank you. I will start with Mariupol. I think it's a human tragedy of the scale one cannot really comprehend. So for me, it's quite hard to apply any military logic and think in terms of gains, because I don't really see what is there to gain. I mean, yes, Russian army can report to Putin that, they advanced on the southern part of Ukraine, and it does make sense if their plan is to conquer southeast of Ukraine. Maybe they will present it as the very original target of this war, which is a complete and obvious lie. Right now, we don't have a full picture of what happened in Mariupol and what are the consequences of Russian attack in Mariupol. But what we know is that the city has been completely ruined. It's literally burned out to ashes. Like, one can Google pictures of Mariupol before and after Russian invasion, and you will understand everything. Military and civilians that were hiding in the steel plant called Azovstal, for almost 3 months, they were living there without, they were deprived of food, water, medicine, let alone any military supplies to be able to defend themselves. And knowing this, Russia was shelling Azovstal every day, sometimes several times per day. Then they were evacuated to Russian side. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of information of what is the current state, but Ukrainian authorities claim that they are planning to get their people back through the prisoner exchange. There's one story I would like to tell about Mariupol, and I think, for me as a Ukrainian and just simply as a human being, it's really heartbreaking. So it made to the news just recently. Basically, Russian authorities try to restore water infrastructure and water supply. They failed. And because of that, a lot of dead bodies that were chaotically buried in the backyards started coming off the surface. And what the Russian authorities did with this corpse, they just put them into a supermarket place, because there is a lack of burying places in Mariupol. So I think that tells a lot about the humanitarian situation and the scale of the tragedy that happened there. We still don't know how many people were killed or just died out of starvation in Mariupol. Ukrainian authorities claim that 22,000 of people were buried in Mariupol. So again, for me, it's hard to, somehow perceive this as some sort of Russian victory. About the developments in war, I think I will refrain from commenting on, military side of things. I'm far from being an expert. Right now, I'm in Kyiv. It's pretty calm and peaceful here, but there are air sirens that alert about potential rocket attacks every day, sometimes even several times per day. People stopped going to shelters, into the basements, not because now it is safe, but because they learned how to live with this war, and they decide to, accommodate to it in a way so that they can just go on with their lives and somehow persevere in this situation. Of course, economic situation is deteriorating a lot. Prices went up, Ukrainian currency devalued, there's a shortage of fuel, shortage of food products. But I mean, this is nothing in comparison to what is happening on the front lines mostly in eastern part of the country, where Russia is launching non-stop artillery and missile attacks, also heavy shellings, and in some towns there are even street fights, like in Severodonetsk.
Yeah, so we all know that how deadly was the Bucha massacre. So could you please take us through that? Because in the Western media also there was this whole debate on the fact that who was responsible for Bucha massacre.
I think when we talk about Bucha, there is the issue of genocide, and I understand that many might feel very discomforted with this diagnosis, because it does sound big, probably too big to comprehend. But I do agree with the professor of Johns Hopkins University, Yevhen Finkel, who claims that, yes, we might have too little evidence as for now to, to do court cases and to basically decide that these concrete individuals were involved in and are responsible for genocide. But we have to talk about the fact that it might be genocide and that a lot of proofs actually signify that. And I think that he states, and I agree, that Bucha is just one example of the overall pattern. And the pattern says that Russia deliberately targets civilian population, especially those who self-identify as Ukrainians, with bombardment, murder, torture, with everything possible. And to my mind, the intent of Putin's regime in this war is twofolded. So the first one is power. He wants to control Ukraine, to be a bigger geopolitical player, and also to preserve his regime. But the second one is denial. First of all, he's in denial with reality. And second of all, he denies the right of Ukrainians to exist. He denies the right of Ukrainian state to be a sovereign, independent state and to choose for its own. So for me, that does sound like a mix of, colonial and also genocidal intent. And we have to understand that what we have seen in Bucha is probably on the much bigger scale in Mariupol. The problem is that we have problems with access to Mariupol, so we cannot see, that scale recorded yet.
Yeah. So, could you please take us through the historical background? Like you told us that what's happening in Bucha and in Kiev and in Mariupol. So now could you please take us through the historical background, like how this conflict started and what made Russia so obsessed about Ukraine?
Yeah, this is a very good question. I think, so historical background is quite huge and it will take us hours to go through it. Ukraine and Russia share a very intertwined history because Russian Empire and Soviet Union ruled over Ukrainian territories and Ukrainian people. For centuries, Russia was persevering policies that were directed on suppressing Ukrainian language, Ukrainian culture. And I think that the goal of Russian state is to make Ukraine dependent. And that has always been there. It is important to understand that there is some legacy. in coming to modern history, Ukraine regained its independence in 1991. And for a while, Ukraine was dependent on Russia economically speaking, and we also shared some sort of similar cultural space because of language and overall because of geographical proximity. The real problems, I guess, started in 2014 when we had revolution. People decided to oust President Yanukovych. It's Ukrainian president who resigned who rejected to sign the deal with the EU. For Ukrainian people, this deal was very important. So they were dissatisfied. And also it's important to understand that Ukraine geographical location and also historical background does not allow us as a country to be neutral. So we have this very clear understanding that it's either alliance with Russia or alliance with the West. And maybe it would be nice to live in some sort of alternative reality where we could be on our own, but it is not, it is not given. So basically, revolution was very anti-Russian. And at the end of it, we ousted our ex-president. Putin definitely did not like this, so he wanted some revenge. That's why he illegally annexed Crimean Peninsula. And then that was in March 2014. And then he launched hybrid war in eastern Ukraine, where there were no soldiers of Russian army, but there were a lot of Russian money, Russian military equipment, and also soldiers without signs of Russian army. So this is the beginning of war. It is important to understand that war started in 2014. What happened on 24th February of 2022 is the continuation of war and the full-scale invasion, where Russia attacked Ukraine all across the country from different sides, from different sides and borders. Speaking of root causes, I think that it is crucial to analyze the root cause, because I think it is crucial not to fall into the narrative of whataboutism and trying to understand what Ukraine might have done, or maybe the West might have done to provoke Putin. So to me, this logic is very flawed because it doesn't help us to break up the circle. And if we do believe that one state cannot violate territorial borders of another one, that one state cannot just come and massively kill civilians, then we cannot apply this logic of analyzing victims' actions and trying to find some problems and some root causes of its behavior. So my point here is that we have to looking for root causes, we have to analyze behavior of Putin's regime and of Russia. Yeah. The problem with Russia is that it is a fascist state. And I do recommend strongly to read essay of Timothy Snyder, who's a brilliant expert on the region in New York Times, and who has enlisted all the arguments proving why Russia is a fascist state. So one of the few is a complete cult of the leader, the state monopoly over information flows, and a repeated appeal to the past, to the history, and especially so to the Second World War. Yeah. So I think that's the biggest root cause. Why so obsessed with Ukraine? Honestly, I don't know, but I know for sure that for such an authoritarian regime as Putin's, it is very dangerous to have a neighboring country that is fighting for democracy actively for already 30 years and that is showing that, there is, that people have will and that they can decide for themselves what is their future, what political and security alliances they want to join. I think this is very irritating to Putin. So probably that is the key reason behind his obsession with Ukraine.
Now, coming to the geopolitical impact of the war, you talked about why is Putin so obsessed about Ukraine. Now, coming to the geopolitical impact on the war, especially on the neighbors of Russia. Do you think that the nations like Finland and Sweden should join NATO, saying what happened in Ukraine? Because we have heard that, Russia has threatened Finland with nukes if they try to join NATO. So how do you see all this?
I think Finland and Sweden should do what they want. So if I were them, I would definitely join NATO, because I think that no matter how well developed is your security and defense system, you feel much more safe when there are 20 plus countries behind your back. And I think the full-scale invasion of Ukraine has shown that one can never underestimate the threat of neighboring authoritarian regimes. So it makes perfect sense for Sweden and Finland to now be willing to join NATO. Ironically, Putin has become the biggest cause behind Western unity. And I also think that about this nuke threats, I mean, honestly, I don't buy this. And I think exploitation of this narrative is not healthy. But to me, I also haven't seen that political leadership in Finland or Sweden or political leadership of NATO took this threat seriously, which is, I fully support. I think this is the way to go, because you show your strengths and power. You show that you cannot be intimidated by somebody who's just lost his mind. But it's also pretty inconsistent, because there's a lot of rhetoric in the West that Ukraine's integration into NATO or its membership aspiration is a provocation. But nobody, speaks of Finnish or Swedish membership ambition as a provocation. Everyone understands that and sees it as a logical consequence of what happened, and somehow, logical move on their side. And I think it also speaks about some sort of post-imperial take on Ukraine, which unfortunately is not only present on the side of Russia, but also on the side of some Western powers.
Yeah. Now coming to NATO, we know that, West and the European countries are sending, weaponries as well as funds to Ukraine. But what about the military? Why did the NATO and the Western countries decided not to send their military to help Ukraine?
Again, very good question. We wonder about in Ukraine. I think there is some sort of balancing and many in the West, including US, want to, hold this war into some sort of stable and understandable borders. So as long as it is about Ukraine, this is the, the situation we can manage and the situation we can allow. Of course, everyone is afraid of, of the Third World War, nuke attack, or basically just, they are afraid of the threat that comes from Russia's actions, which is, a normal reaction one can understand. But I think that it's very problematic if the West does not clearly understand what is its goal in this war. Because if the goal is for Ukraine to survive, no matter the cost, no matter the time, then it's not a good objective, to be honest, because we have to understand that time is not months or weeks. time is people, those who have been and will be, unfortunately, killed, tortured, raped. And, it is a problem, not the problem, but it is the question whether the West is ready to accept that. Because if it is, then I think we have problems, I do believe that the West have to clearly set its objective. And I am convinced that the objective should be the victory of Ukraine and the weakening of Putin's regime. The alternative doesn't really work out. But also, I do understand that a lot of these foreign policy solutions Western governments take depend on the, will of their people and overall constraints they have within their states. So, of course, everyone in Ukraine understands that nobody will equip Ukraine militarily or send their forces overnight. We do understand that there are many limitations and obstacles on the way, but at the same time, we are living in the state of war for almost 100 days. And I think it's quite a lot of time, for the West to decide on what is its objective in this war and what is basically the ultimate action plan.
Yeah. So I would like to conclude the discussion by asking that what does the future hold in terms of this conflict? Where do you see Ukraine in the coming few years?
Oh, few years. We say in Ukraine that we don't plan anything but the next few hours. So few years is quite a big question. But I do believe, and I think there's a lot of actually polls showing that overwhelming majority of Ukrainians, around 94%, are super optimistic about the future of Ukraine, which may seem from the outside as some sort of, illusion people live in. But I think that our unity and the very fact that we managed to resist and we are still fighting gave us a lot of promise and a lot of belief in our own forces. So I definitely see Ukraine as an independent country. In terms of territorial borders, it is to be seen to what borders we will return ultimately. And that, of course, depends on the military action on the ground and also negotiations if they ever to take place. But I hope that in, say, 2 or 3 years, the fighting is over. Ukraine is having a clear EU membership prospect, and Ukraine is keeping on, advancing on its reform track and changing itself from within. And I also hope that we will have more peace and security on the European continent and in the world overall, and that we will learn lessons that after all of this, because if not, then, history is definitely not teaching us.
Really hope that situation in Ukraine gets better soon. On this note, I want to end this interview. Thank you so much, Lilia, for your time. Really appreciate that you have taken out the time to do this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.